Hey everybody, Happy New Year. This is the day after New Year's Day and I'm back at work. So see, we have a pretty full shop, a lot of projects here, but today I wanted to take some time out and show y'all a little bit about CV axles. Okay, so CV axles are on most front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive vehicles, and they do give problems at times. They are wear items, they do wear out, they do break at times, but today we're going to talk about how to inspect them, a little bit on replacement, and I'm going to show you the different components of a CV axle and show y'all how to diagnose a bad axle. Stay tuned.
Okay, here is our new CV axle. You can get these from any auto parts store. Most of them will have them in stock. You need to make sure that you get the driver or passenger side the correct one. They do vary from side to side sometimes. They also vary between manual and automatic transmission. So make sure that you give the parts professional all their information that they're asking for to get you the correct axle. So our axle has a couple of different parts here. This is one off of a 2003 Volkswagen Passat automatic 1.8 turbo. This is the inner joint right here. The inner joint is going to be the joint that goes towards the transmission or the differential. The outer joint is going to be the one that's closest to the wheel. Okay, so this has two joints on it, and they're CV joints. You can get these joints separate and just replace those, but I just recommend replacing the whole axle. It's just a lot easier normally, and it doesn't cost much more. So your outer joint may have what we call a tone ring on it. This tone ring is for ABS, for the wheel speed sensor, to kind of see how fast this axle is turning. And your flange right here, it may be, you may have a different style flange. This is a bolt-up flange instead of a press-in flange, but for the most part, outside of that, these axles are the same. So these joints on the end, normally what you'll see is this boot will rip. They get old and brittle and dry, and it'll rip, and you have a very thick grease inside this that will leak out. You'll lose lubrication, you'll get dirt and sand and stuff in here, and it'll cause this joint to deteriorate. You'll get a clicking noise sometimes in turning on the outside joints, popping noise. It sounds like a sharp metallic crack when you're turning. On the inner joints, normally when we see these start to go bad, you'll get a vibration on acceleration and gear change, deceleration, things like that. Normally at cruising speeds it won't make any vibration, but you'll see some play when you shake this up and down, and I'll show you the Passat that I'm working on because I know it has it. And you'll be able to shake this back and forth, and you'll see that this will actually move, and this piece won't move. Okay, so you know, back in the day we used to replace the joints and replace the boots here with new clamps and stuff, but for the most part nowadays we're just putting in the axle. These axles normally are under $100 a piece. Sometimes they're very cheap, $50, $45 a piece or so. So we normally just replace the whole axle instead of the CV joint itself. So this is the vehicle that we're dealing with today. It's a 2003 Volkswagen Passat. It has about 167,000 miles on it, and 1.8 turbo automatic transmission. So we're going to jack it up, and I'm going to show you how to inspect these axles. Okay, so I got the car up in the air on the rack, and I've taken the wheel off just to kind of show y'all. It's a little bit easier to show you with the wheel off. To do this inspection, you really don't need to have the wheel off. You just need to be able to get under the car and make sure you can see everything and feel everything. So here's the axle in question that I feel is bad, because driving down the road, accelerating and decelerating, the car will vibrate on this side pretty good. So you just want to inspect this boot, make sure there's no cuts or anything. And this isn't doing a clicking noise, so I'm believing it's an inside joint that's bad. And so the inside joint's a little hard to see. It's right here. And I'm going to put my hand on it and I'm going to shake it. And you can barely hear it, but you can hear a click noise back and forth. So it does have some play in this axle, enough to cause that vibration. So this axle, the inside joint is bad. I would just replace the entire axle. Over here on this side, I'm not really feeling much of a vibration. And again, if you pull this, you don't really, there's no there's no play here in this axle, so this axle should be fine. Okay, so on this car right here, this again is a 2003 Volkswagen Passat. We have a couple of different unique ways to get this axle out, but I'm going to show you kind of the easiest way that I've learned. First thing we're going to need to do is get some bolts out. The first bolt, and probably one of the hardest bolts that you're going to have to deal with, is going to be this center bolt right here. So there's a couple of different ways we can get this loose. All of them is going to require a good amount of power to get out. So you can put a socket on it and you can try to turn it with an impact, and maybe you have a strong enough impact. I've got this Milwaukee right here. I'm going to try it, but if you can't get it off of the impact, you can take the center cap off the wheel right here and put the wheel back on the car, lower the car, use the weight of the car to keep the tire still, and take a breaker bar and be able to turn this nut to the left. If you just try to turn it with the breaker bar now, you're just going to spin. There's not going to be anything that's going to stop the rotor. Now also, this is probably another way you can do it. You can put something in here to stop this rotor from turning, like a long, strong screwdriver, and put a lug nut in here, because right now, you see, if you just turn this, your hub on the inside is not going to line up, and it's not actually going to turn this, because we're trying to turn the hub. We're trying to hold the hub still, not the rotor. So you put a lug nut in here, put a screwdriver in here to hold this still. Just stick it through the vents in the top of the rotor, and you can also keep this still. I do warn against doing this if you've got the car on a jack stand, because you can rock the car loose trying to get this nut loose. Okay, so the nut's out. It's a 27 millimeter for anybody keeping track of what tools they're going to need. Came right out with the Milwaukee, and now we're going to have to do a couple other things. One of the things that we're going to do is we need to pull the ABS speed sensor, which is going to be right there. Okay, so it just pulls out. You may need to use pliers. Be very careful, it's plastic, so sometimes just a twist and pull. We just need to make sure that that slides out. And then we are going to take off this bolt right here, which sometimes gives people problems. I'd recommend, if you're doing this, to go ahead and soak this bolt down overnight with some penetrant, which I've already done. This bolt sometimes will seize up because of the different metals here. And you may even, if you're ordering all this stuff online or something, just order one of these pinch bolts here, just in case you destroy this one trying to get this one out. So then we're going to take off the tie rod end here. So you have a bolt right here that needs to come out. I think it's a 13 millimeter, and then a bolt right here. It's got a pinch bolt, and then that should just pretty much fall out. They don't get stuck too often, but if so, you may have to rock it out a little bit with a hammer. But so these bolts need to come out, and then this whole assembly will shift forward. But we also need to, before we get too far into it, we need to go and loosen up each one of these star bolts here. It's a 12-point spline socket, and we're going to have to go through and take off all 6 of those. And once we get all those off, we can lean this forward and pop the axle out. Quick tip on the axle bolts, which are back here. I don't have a light, so it's kind of hard to see. I just took one out here. This is going to be a triple square. You need to make sure you have a good set of triple squares. They're pretty much selling these anywhere now that you can buy tools. Sometimes they're called a 12-point spline. But how I get these off on these cars, especially when I have them up in the air, is I will put a lug nut through here. That's to keep the rotor and the hub together. And I will put a screwdriver, again, right here, and that's just to keep the rotor still. It locks it in. You want to make sure it's a fairly good screwdriver. This is a Craftsman right here. But so get you a decent extension with a flex coupling or a U-joint in there, and you should be able to get these right off. On these, I always Loctite these back into place with some red Loctite, because I have seen them come loose shortly after replacing the axle, and if so, they can beat around here and they can actually break the transmission or pop a crack in the case or something like that. That's going to get really expensive. So always Loctite these back, always torque them back to specifications. Okay, so I'm back. It's been about an hour since I stopped the other recording, but I had a heck of a time trying to get this bolt out here. I had to use some heat, some oil, and ended up taking a air hammer and a chisel to get this bolt that was here all the way out. So you're probably going to have to replace that bolt. Here's the bolt here that I was using that was in here before. You see the corrosion there. See where I had to use the air hammer. I cut it off and I used the air hammer to push it out, but even that wasn't easy. I had to get the air hammer, the chisel side on this side, and actually push the bolt out of the housing. So what I'm going to do real quick is just clean all the corrosion out of this spindle housing here. But once you get this bolt out, it's fairly easy. You may have to take a little hammer and jostle the top control arms out of the spindle, but they should come pretty much right out. And then what we're going to do is just clean everything up with a wire brush. I have a bore brush here that I'm going to stick in here and clean all that gunk out. And then when we put the new bolt in, we're going to put some anti-seize on it to keep this from happening again, hopefully, and lubricate everything correctly and then torque it back to specification. But once you get this out, the axle will pretty much pull out here and it'll pretty much fall out. I've got to use two hands, so I won't be able to record that. But once I get the axle out, I'll show you some more on what actually happened with this axle here. All right, so we got the old axle out next to the new axle here, and we're just comparing the two, making sure that they are the same dimension, make sure they're the same length. They may have a different width depending on what quality that you go with. This right here is just a run-of-the-mill. I believe I got this from AutoZone, so lifetime warranty on it, so anything ever happens to it, I just take it back and get another one. So just inspecting this, I want to make sure that you know, if I have to transfer tone rings, sometimes on these axles the tone ring will come off the old axle and fit on the new axle for the ABS. If you happen to swap axles and you get an ABS, like a wheel speed sensor code for that wheel, that may be an issue. You may have forgotten to do that. So the outside joint, the outer joint here looks good, the boot's good. I don't see any leaks or anything like that. But the problem that we were having was the inside joint was causing some vibration. So if you look over here, this boot busted wide open. When I was taking it out, I didn't see because it wasn't busted on that side. It was actually busted up top. And you can see here that all the grease is run. It's pretty much dry in there as far as that goes. But you can see the rollers and everything that attach this to the outside cup here. And what happens is the ramps in there on those, where those rollers ride, will start to wear down because of lack of lubrication or because of dirt and sand and everything gets in here. And then you'll get that vibration at acceleration or deceleration, or if you're changing gears, if it's a manual transmission, you'll get some type of a vibration. Going uphill with loads or unloaded or whatever, you'll just get that vibration. So that's kind of how, now the outside joint doesn't work the same way as the inside joint does, because the outside joint has to bend at more extreme angles than the inside joint does. So you'll have some balls and ramps in there that connects all this together. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to take the new axle, put it back in. Again, assembly is pretty much reverse of disassembly. There's really nothing you need to worry about except for you need to Loctite these bolts that go into here and torque everything to the correct specifications. Very important, especially with these bolted-in axles, to Loctite them and to make sure that they are torqued to specification. Well, with that, again, this wasn't really a how-to video as far as on axle removal and replacement. I did show you kind of the motions of going through and doing that. But as for me, I'm Taylor Bryant, Master Tech, and see you in the next video.